October 1962, 13 days that nearly ended human civilization. American U-2 spy planes photograph Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba. President Kennedy faces an impossible choice: launch a military strike and risk nuclear war, or negotiate and appear weak. The fate of millions hangs in the balance. But there's something Kennedy knows that Khrushchev doesn't know he knows. A secret weapon. Not a missile or a bomb, but information. Intelligence so precise, so detailed, that it gives the President of the United States the confidence to make decisions that will prevent World War III. That intelligence came from one man, a Soviet colonel who chose to betray his country to save the world. This is the story of Oleg Penkovsky, the most valuable spy in Cold War history. Moscow, 1960. The Soviet Union projects an image of military supremacy. Premier Nikita Khrushchev boasts that Soviet factories produce intercontinental ballistic missiles like sausages. The West watches in fear as the communist superpower claims technological superiority in the arms race. Colonel Oleg Vladimirovich Penkovsky knows the truth, and the truth is very different. Born in 1919, Penkovsky fought in World War II and rose through the ranks of the GRU Soviet military intelligence. He served with distinction, earning medals and recognition. By 1960, he held a position that granted him extraordinary access to the Soviet Union's most closely guarded military secrets. But Penkovsky carried a permanent stigma. His father had been a white Russian officer, an enemy of the Bolsheviks during the Civil War. In Stalin's Soviet Union, this was an unforgivable sin. No matter his service record, no matter his loyalty, Penkovsky would never fully escape suspicion. He was passed over for promotions. His career had a ceiling he could never break through. Yet his disillusionment went deeper than personal grievance. Penkovsky had witnessed the brutality of Stalin's purges. He saw the corruption within the Communist Party. He attended meetings where Soviet military leaders discussed nuclear warfare with chilling casualness. And increasingly, he came to believe that the Soviet leadership's recklessness would lead to catastrophe. Oleg Penkovsky made a decision that would define the rest of his life and potentially save millions of others. He would offer his services to the West, not for money, not for asylum, but to prevent what he saw as inevitable nuclear war. But there was one problem. How does a Soviet intelligence officer contact Western agents without being caught and executed? Penkovsky's first attempts were desperate and dangerous. In Moscow, he approached American tourists, attempting to pass them notes. He tried to make contact with Canadian embassy officials. Each attempt risked immediate arrest. The KGB's surveillance network in Moscow was omnipresent. One wrong move, one suspicious behavior, and Penkovsky would disappear into the Lubyanka prison, never to be seen again. Then, in April 1961, opportunity arrived. Penkovsky was selected to travel to London as part of a Soviet trade delegation. For a GRU colonel suspected of disloyalty, this would normally be impossible, but his technical expertise and language skills made him valuable enough to risk. In London, Penkovsky made contact with British MI6 and American CIA officers. What he offered stunned Western intelligence agencies. He had access to Soviet missile technology, nuclear weapon specifications, and military strategic planning. He could provide photographs of classified documents. He could reveal the truth about Soviet military capabilities. And he wanted nothing in return except the assurance that his intelligence would be used to prevent war, not start one. Western intelligence gave him the code name Hero. The CIA would later call him the single most valuable agent in Cold War history. For the next 18 months, Oleg Penkovsky became a double life personified. In Moscow, he was the loyal Soviet officer, attending meetings, preparing reports, and maintaining his cover. In secret, he was photographing thousands of pages of classified material using a miniature Minix spy camera no larger than a cigarette lighter. The espionage tradecraft was sophisticated but dangerous. Dead drops in Moscow parks, secret meetings in safe houses during foreign trips, coded signals involving specific phone calls and window arrangements. Every communication carried the risk of exposure. Penkovsky smuggled out more than 5,000 photographs of Soviet military documents, technical manuals, missile specifications, strategic assessments, intelligence reports on Soviet capabilities and intentions. But the most critical information concerned one specific weapons system, the R-12 medium-range ballistic missile. What Penkovsky revealed fundamentally altered Western understanding of the Cold War balance of power. Khrushchev's boasts about Soviet missile superiority were largely propaganda. The Soviet Union possessed far fewer operational intercontinental ballistic missiles than Western intelligence had feared. Their technology lagged behind American capabilities. Their missiles were less accurate, less reliable, and significantly fewer in number than the Soviets claimed. This intelligence was politically and strategically explosive. It meant that the missile gap that dominated Western political discourse in the late 1950s was a myth, or rather, it existed, but in the opposite direction than feared. Among the documents Penkovsky provided were detailed technical specifications and photographs of the R-12 missile system. These documents included launch procedures, fuel requirements, operational timelines, and targeting capabilities. At the time, this information seemed valuable but abstract, useful for general military planning but not immediately actionable. Then came October 1962. American U-2 reconnaissance aircraft photographed unusual construction activity in Cuba. Photo interpreters identified patterns consistent with military installations. But what kind of installations? What weapons systems were being deployed? The photographs showed missile transporters, launch equipment, and infrastructure. But without precise identification, American policymakers faced terrifying uncertainty. Were these short-range defensive weapons, or nuclear-capable missiles that could strike American cities? This is where Penkovsky's intelligence became decisive. CIA analysts compared the Cuban photographs with the documents Penkovsky had provided. The match was exact. The missiles being deployed in Cuba were R-12 medium-range ballistic missiles, the precise weapons system Penkovsky had documented in meticulous detail. Because of Penkovsky's intelligence, American analysts could determine critical operational information. The missiles required specific fuel and oxidizer combinations. They needed concrete launching pads. Most importantly, the missiles required several days to become fully operational after delivery. This information gave President Kennedy what he needed most: time and options. He knew the missiles were not yet operational. He knew their capabilities and limitations. He could calibrate his response based on accurate intelligence rather than worst-case assumptions. During the 13 days of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy and his advisors debated military strikes, naval blockades, and diplomatic solutions. Some military leaders pushed for immediate airstrikes to destroy the missile sites before they became operational. This could easily have triggered nuclear war. But Kennedy, armed with Penkovsky's detailed intelligence, knew he had time to negotiate. The naval quarantine gave Khrushchev space to back down without losing face catastrophically. The crisis resolved through a combination of public concessions and private negotiations. Historians continue to debate the Cuban Missile Crisis, but many intelligence experts argue that without Penkovsky's information, Kennedy would have faced impossible choices with catastrophically incomplete information. The risk of miscalculation and nuclear war would have been exponentially higher. One man's decision to commit treason against his country may have prevented the deaths of millions. While Kennedy and Khrushchev navigated the most dangerous moment of the Cold War, Oleg Penkovsky's world was collapsing. The KGB had been investigating him. The exact sequence of events that led to his exposure remains debated. Some historians believe Soviet counterintelligence detected irregularities in his behavior or communications. Others suspect a mole within Western intelligence, possibly George Blake. The British double agent working for the Soviets may have provided information that led to Penkovsky. On October 22, 1962, in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Penkovsky was arrested. The timing was grimly ironic. The intelligence he had provided was being used in real time to prevent nuclear war. And at that exact moment, he was being taken into custody by the KGB. What followed was brutal. Soviet interrogation techniques were designed to extract confessions and break resistance. Penkovsky was held in Lefortovo prison, interrogated repeatedly, and eventually forced to confess to espionage and treason. In May 1963, Penkovsky was put on trial in a proceeding designed for propaganda purposes. The Soviet government wanted to send an unmistakable message about the fate of traitors. The trial was publicized. Penkovsky's confession was read. He was portrayed as a traitor who had sold out the motherland for Western money and promises. On May 16, 1963, Oleg Penkovsky was executed. Official Soviet records state he was shot. Unverified rumors claimed he was burned alive in a crematorium furnace. A particularly horrific form of execution meant to terrorize other potential defectors. The truth remains uncertain. What is certain? Penkovsky died knowing his intelligence had been used. He died knowing he had accomplished what he set out to do. And he died knowing his family would pay the price for his actions. His wife and daughters faced years of stigma, surveillance, and hardship in the Soviet Union. In the communist system, the sins of the father extended to the entire family. They were marked as relatives of a traitor, a stain that would follow them for decades.